You're listening to Beat Autoimmune and Thrive, the podcast all about reversing and preventing autoimmune conditions so you can live your most vibrant life as soon as possible. We talk about autoimmune root causes, actionable solutions, and inspirational healing stories. I'm Palmer Kippola, and I used to have MS. Today, I'm an author, a speaker, a functional medicine certified health coach, a pickleball player, and nature lover who's helped thousands of people reclaim their health and their best lives. Let's dive into this episode. I am thrilled to be joined today by my friend and board-certified physician and immunologist, Dr. Heather Moday. Dr. Moday specializes in integrative and functional medicine, internal medicine, allergy, and immunology. In addition to her medical degree, Dr. Moday pursued a fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona under the guidance of Dr. Andrew Weil. She's also a certified functional medicine practitioner through the Institute for Functional Medicine. Dr. Moday is the author of the Immunotype Breakthrough, your personalized plan to balance your immune system, optimize health, and build lifelong resilience. It's a wonderful book that explores different immune system types and offers strategies for achieving optimal health. Dr. Moday is dedicated to helping individuals transform their health by teaching them how to optimize their environment, nutrition, and stress management. Her main areas of interest include the impact of stress and environmental factors on the immune system, the gut-brain connection, mood and cognition issues, and enhancing brain function and productivity, and the role of, of inflammation as we age. I am delighted to have her join me today as we're going to dive into each one of these areas. And before we get started, I just want to say that I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Moday 11 years ago at the Institute for Functional Medicine's Immune Dysfunction module, which was my very first IFM experience when I was just beginning to delve into researching and studying how to heal from autoimmune disease. And Heather was kind and encouraging and welcomed me into the IFM fold. So I'm delighted to have you here. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to see you since it's been many years.
It has been many years, and I'm so glad you're here. And since the 1990s, autoimmune disease has become epidemic. And so it's important that people understand what's happening in their body and why, so that they can take better control of their health outcomes. And so I want to set the frame that autoimmune disease is not a body part problem. It's an immune system problem. And we're going to dive into what harms the immune system, which types of immune system dysfunction are possible, and then how you can restore your immune function and resilience. And so, given that, I always like to start with story, and I'd love if we could go back a little bit in time to your experiences as an allergist and immunologist when you were treating people with eczema, hives, and allergies. What was that like, and what did you observe?
Well, it was actually fairly boring. I'll tell you that. I became an allergist immunologist because I was really interested in the immune system, allergies. I just thought it was fascinating. And then, you go into private practice as a conventional doctor, and I wasn't taught anything in medical school or in residency necessarily about, nutrition or anything like that. I mean, I was a healthy person. I was interested myself personally in, exercise and eating well and that sort of thing. But what's interesting is I didn't really think about this until actually when I wrote the book, is before I even went to medical school, I graduated from college and I needed a job. And I lived near New York City, and there's a very esteemed research institution called the Rockefeller University. So I ended up as a lab tech in this lab, and it was actually run by a really famous, basically what's called a neuroendocrinologist. He studied the brain and hormones, but he also had a whole section in his lab that studied the effects of the hormone cortisol, our stress hormone, on our immune system. So I was like this little lab tech in this lab that was like at the precipice of like studying how stress affected our immune function. And I didn't really think about it. I was there for 3 years. But I think it really planted a seed in my brain because I remember, to answer your question, a couple of years into treating allergies and immunology with, allergy symptoms, with steroids and antibiotics and antihistamines and all the standard drugs, I started to think like, why are these people, why, no one knows why people get allergies. Like there was no answers. They were like, oh, it's probably all the genetics. I'm like, can't just be all genetics, right? Like, because you'll ask people, oh, my parents don't have it. Yes, my brother has allergies, but then people would have spontaneous food sensitivities or spontaneous asthma. And, I started seeing patterns of like people having asthma attacks because they were stressed. Um,
Mm.
so, I myself started getting really frustrated because it was just sort of like a revolving door. So I was literally bored. And I'm a naturally very curious person. And so I sought out, I went to an integrative medicine conference in New York City. So this is probably like 2007. And it was there that I got introduced to this whole concept of integrative medicine. They had a booth there. And I thought, oh, I really want to do this fellowship. And it was very expensive and it was 2 years long, so I had to, like, save up the money and time, and so that's when I finally, got into that, and then after that, my world sort of changed because
Mhm.
after you're introduced to that and then functional medicine sort of followed, you can't even go back to thinking about medicine and health in the same way anymore. So, I think that's my long story.
Oh, it's a great story, and I love it when conventionally trained medical doctors have to come to their own, um, conclusions about, is what you're doing helping? And I would imagine that you're giving these medications to people, and maybe they kept coming back, or maybe you observed and, did you see that they weren't getting better? I mean, did you come to some of your own conclusions about that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like many things, I we didn't have answers for them. And that's okay. We don't have the answers to everything, but there was no even research. Like people would say, for example, urticaria or hives is like the bane of an allergist's existence because if it's what they call idiopathic, meaning like there's no known reason,
Yeah.
we just have to say, "Hey, we don't know why you have chronic hives every day. Here, take some Benadryl." And to me, that was so frustrating. And there was also no research. There's nothing out there. Zero. And, the poor patient is like not getting better and is stuck on, Benadryl for the rest of their life or prednisone. And I just thought, well, if there's no answer, then why aren't we looking outside? Like, why aren't we trying to figure this out? Um, so yeah, I think, frustration played a huge role, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. That's the contrast that we need to help us go into a different direction. So now you went through the Andrew Weil program, the integrative
Mhm.
medicine, and then did you come back to establish your own clinic at this point as an integrative physician?
So, yeah, it's funny because I came back, I was part of this large practice that was very, I'm just gonna say it, they were very small-minded. They really did not, I don't think this was something that could fit within the confines of the practice. And also at that time, I started thinking, well, I don't wanna just be an allergist immunologist. Like, now I've learned all this stuff, right? Like, you start learning about, the gut-brain interaction and nutrition and hormones and stress management, like, all this stuff, and I'm thinking, "Well, I'm just gonna open up a practice that is a little bit, you know, wider, that I can help more people." I mean, that's a double-edged sword, I have to say, but, that's how it happened, and so I just took this bold leap. I had no idea what I was doing, quite honestly, of opening a practice, running a practice. This was before social media was, like, a huge thing, and there was no coaches to help you start a business. I mean, I was bootstrapping it. So that was 2014, I think. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's
So
what
since
happened.
then, you've seen hundreds of patients and you've worked with
Yep.
so many people, and
Mhm.
then you started to see patterns emerging. And I want to lead you into the discussion of the four different immunotypes, because
Mhm.
that is a brilliant way of classifying different immune system types that I've never seen anybody do before. So, is there anything that you want to comment on in terms of the evolution of what you started to see with people getting better once they followed an integrative approach?
Yeah, and so the reason why I came up with this concept of types, and of course they're somewhat fluid, right? But um, you know, I think my frustration was that, especially in the lay news and what people, sort of interpret about the immune system, is that it's like this thing that is like either up or down, right? It's like
Yeah.
this one thing, and it's either boosted or it's, low, or it it's not that. And I got very frustrated because, it's such an incredible system, because it's probably the only system, except for maybe like the circulatory system or the lymphatic system, which actually physically doesn't have like one home. In fact, you know, I think it's the only one, if I think about it, because your immune system exists in every single part of your body. Every part. It doesn't have a home. I mean, yes, it's got lymph nodes that they stop off, and they have like, there's an area in the gut, obviously, where there's a large quantity of immune cells, but they're everywhere. Everywhere. In our brain, our eyes, our skin, everywhere. And so and it's so ridiculously complex that I wanted to try to explain it to people in a way that they could understand. But I also really wanted to delineate that it's all about balance. That, like, right now in my body and your body, there's inflammation going on, because inflammation happens constantly, because we're constantly surveilling the environment. We're constantly breathing things in or eating things, right? And so there's always inflammatory responses, and those go away. And, so it's all about balance. So these types came out of like more pathology. So people showing up with, let's just say, allergies or autoimmune disease, or just chronic inflammation, heart disease, etc. And then people who literally have a weakened immune response, an inability to actually fight off what we would consider to be like typical issues. They're sick all the time. So those were sort of the four, which I labeled. And I wanted to sort of look at each one and, go through sort of symptoms, but also what do we know about what's going on in those areas. And so it was just a lot of research. And what I found is that there was quite a bit of information about how some of these types, let's just say someone who has a weakened immunity, doesn't respond well to vaccines, or doesn't, what what it can be related to. Like, is it related to previous exposure to chemicals? And yes, that's true in some cases. Is it due to nutrient deficiencies? Absolutely yes. Sleep disturbance? Absolutely yes. And so I started just putting together this, you know, almost like a workbook or a handbook about, okay, if these are your issues, these are some areas that you can focus on. So,
It's so empowering because and I love the quizzes that you have in the book, because I think that's such an approachable way for people to figure out, well, which type am I?
mhm,
And, I just found it super, super helpful to go through, to figure out what can I do? Misguided immune system, I identified with that one. And you
yeah,
give some clues, like, how do people know which type you are? But not only that, what then can you do? Because I think the hope that is offered in your approach and what I do with people is that you can heal. You can
absolutely.
heal. And the
Mhm,
key
yeah,
is to discover what your root causes are, or your areas of weakness, potentially, and shore
mhm,
them up and heal your gut and address them. So there's so much hope of what people can do. And so I know you offer this quiz in the book, and I really, really think this would be a fabulous toolkit for anybody that's dealing with an autoimmune condition. So I'm just going to put it up here
mhm,
again because I've never seen anything like it. Autoimmunity is an immune system problem. It's not a body part problem. So if you
right.
are dealing with autoimmunity, or you're sick all the time and you can't figure out why, this will help you to understand why. And I think what you do, Heather, is such a beautiful job breaking down really complicated information and making it approachable for people. This is in language of the average person, not in PubMed scientific speak. This
Mhm.
is practical, and you've got this beautiful toolkit of things that people can do based on the type of immune system or the immune function that they might have. So
Mhm.
I wondered, are there other places, your website, drmoday.com,
Yes, it's actually on
DRMODAY.
my website. It is sort of under, construction, but, probably by the time this comes out, it will be live. But yes, the quiz is available and will stay available there. And I believe, at least I had, that people can download the first chapter of the book too for free. So,
Fantastic. I think that's great. And that to me is maybe the best access point to understanding what you do and how people can take care of their immune system. So let's move on to autoimmune disorders because it's an epidemic. It's 1 in 5 people,
mhm,
maybe more, are dealing with mysterious symptoms or maybe diagnosed with one or more autoimmune disorders. And it's getting worse and worse. So, talk to me
mhm.
about what you're seeing as the main drivers that instigate autoimmunity.
It's so hard because you don't really know when someone comes in, right? But I think that there's certain patterns that I see that are definitively due to our environment, but also to someone's sort of experience in the world. And what I mean by that is that, and there's a lot of data on this, is one certainly is why have we had this huge increase? I do think part of that is mm, you know environmental, right? So um, we live on a planet that is very polluted, air, water, things that we literally touch, eat every single day. So when we're exposed to things like that, drip, 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 right? That's always going to impact us because life, it's our whole life, right? So, and we know that we have a massive problem with that. So I think that that is huge. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a big issue because as I talk about in the book, and I think you probably, I think you talk about this too, but so things that say like heavy metals or different things that we're exposed to, chemicals, they can actually become part of our tissues or can change our tissues, and then they call that a hapten. So that's an immunologic term for something that has changed. That hapten is something that your immune system recognizes as being foreign, but it's literally a combination of something that's man-made outside of our body and our own natural tissue, right? So
Yeah.
that's one, and I do think that we have a massive problem there. Um, I think number 2 is, chronic stress. We've always had stress, we're always gonna continue to have stress, but I do believe that, in a modern world, we just don't nobody has time anymore. Nobody has, we prioritize everything that is based on work. There's very little connection. And we know just based on early studies with like just say rat data, but even animal data, is that animals when they are chronically stressed, and this is some of the work that I did as you know, a very naive, out of college student. We literally worked with rats who were chronically stressed, and it changes their immune system. Their thymus, which is where their T cells develop, would shrink, literally shrink. Their B cells would their lymphatic center, their lymph nodes where the B cells hang out, would shrink. So, you literally have changes in your immune system due to chronic, I'm not going to say chronic cortisol because, cortisol is elevated during stress, but when we get into a burnt out state, it's actually sometimes lower. But it's this inability for our brain, adrenal axis to actually um, basically recover, right? It doesn't recover. Um, And there's lots of data that I point to that people who've been in trauma, whether it's small trauma, big trauma, people who've been in the military. Um, I know Gabor Mate. I know he's controversial, but he's written a lot of stuff on emotional repression. The inability to basically stand up for yourself or emote, and that association with multiple autoimmune diseases. So I think there's a huge aspect there that we don't talk about enough. Um, and I do think that just like the gut issues, it mediates all of it, right? I mean, the gut is really the portal. It's the portal to our immune system, right?
Yes.
It's the way it gets manipulated. It's the way that we are able to, our immune system is able to sort of see what's going on and what's coming through the body. And then they have to make a decision about it, you know? So that's a long answer, but I think, and there's obviously many other things, but I think that's, for me, what I would see when I would have patients come in a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yes, I am familiar with each of these. The haptens, the foreign particles. I mean, I see this and we see this in our practice with women that get breast implants.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
this, predates the advent of lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or MS or you name the autoimmune disorder when that foreign material binds with human tissue. And I think Dr. Vojdani and Datis, Dr. K, not going to massacre
Okay.
his name, yes, did a study on BPA and how
Yep.
that, in fact, binds to human tissue. And then all of a sudden, our immune systems think that's a foreign invader and start attacking that.
Mhm.
So that is it's a, what do we call it? One of the mechanisms of autoimmunity. And I think it's
Mhm.
to your point exactly, it is just becoming increasingly problematic as we are exposed to more of these toxic elements in our environment, right?
Exactly, and I think the term you're searching for is molecular mimicry, and that is something, that is one of the proposed, mechanisms behind autoimmunity. But when you look at the cells that are really involved in continued, autoimmune activity, it's very pro-inflammatory. It's just misdirected, right? But the
That's right.
inflammatory, cells, the T cells, are different. They're a different type. Particular, there's something that's called, helper cell. They call them helper cells. They're not really helping, but Th17 cells. So Th17 cells have a specific repertoire of cytokines, which are very anti-inflammatory, and so they sort of get stuck. They get stuck in this position where they recognize tissue and they just can't stop. It's just this degradation and constant inflammatory response against own tissue. So, um, yeah, and I think that's what happens with autoimmune disease is that, like, once you have these auto antibodies set, it takes a while, right, to get rid of
Yeah.
them because they
Yeah,
have
it does.
lives.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's true.
right. But
And
the good thing is that we know that you can decrease symptoms. We see this obviously with people with Hashimoto's disease. A lot of people do very, very, very well. They're still going to have high titers of antithyroid antibodies, but they feel good. Maybe they've gone down. They're less symptomatic or asymptomatic. So, you know.
yeah. Well, the real hope is, and it takes a while for antibodies to calm down and come back to normal. I mean, this is
Mhm.
what we see that, but the possibility, and I think the promise of this root cause approach is that full healing is possible. And in the
Mhm.
past, when I heard six neurologists tell me there was nothing I could do, I would have this forever. There is no cure. And by the way, the word cure means to restore to balance. So
Mhm.
the cure is within. I'm not looking for a medication to cure me, so I can say it as a health coach and not be speaking about medication when, in fact, the process of healing is removing the things that are in the way that are blocking your healing. And so when you work with people who come to you with these disorders and you see the level of toxins that they might have, the chemical exposures, the chronic stress they're under, the gut issues, how do you
Mhm.
go about um, what's the first thing that you do when you see somebody with just a constellation of symptoms and maybe a
Yeah.
few autoimmune disorders? And how do you go about breaking it down simply for people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, i- in both functional medicine and integrative medicine, I mean, the sort of the background and the interview and the history is so important because we're still focusing on what's the most important thing for you? Like, what is the symptom or the issue that bothers you the most? Um, and let's really focus right on that. Let's see what we can do about that. But also we have to look at, well, yes, you can order a bajillion tests on everybody, but that's not really practical. It's very can be expensive, but it also, you tend to find a lot of what we call red herrings, right? Things that might be abnormal, but they're not going to really make a huge difference. And so, you want to focus on what someone's history is like. So if someone tells me that, and it's funny because I would have people like literally not tell me into the third visit that, their father was murdered when they were 12 years old. And I'm like, how how did you neglect to think that that wasn't an issue, right? It's a massive issue. But I think a lot of people just don't think about that, you know, so they don't bring it up. But for example, if someone's had a concussion, these are things that are in our history and they can make a huge difference. What their exposures have been, what have their jobs been, right? Where did they live? Where did they grow up? Um, I've had people who've been in the military, been exposed to multiple different things. So, I think that you've got to sort of pull out those things first and say, hey, this is a high risk for you. So then we want to look, I'm not going to maybe run toxicity screens on everybody. Um, but we're going to say like, well, you've been in the military and you were exposed to this, this, and this, or this is your occupation. We're going to look at this, or you've had a trauma in your life, or you feel burnt out, you went through divorce, whatever it was, right? Um, so we're going to look at your, adrenals system, and we do that for most people. But it's sort of like you really try to focus on someone's history first, and then what are their major concerns. And then also explain like this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like, and this, right? I mean, autoimmune disease takes decades to manifest um, as a symptom. And so many things have been going on for a long time. And so we're not going to necessarily make things better in 3 months, right? We're going to come up with a game plan. Um, so that's really important to understand that it is a slow thing. It's very easy to get overwhelmed and want to change everything in your life all at once.
Yeah.
That is impractical. It causes undue amount of emotional stress. Um, but I think also understanding that you do have to make changes. They are going to be hard sometimes, and that you should take help where you can get it, right? Don't think that you have to do everything and lean on people, right? Um, so and this is what I found a lot too is I remember I had one patient who had terrible rheumatoid arthritis and she was very young. She was about 27 years old. She was a new attorney. Oh my God, she wanted to be partner. And I thought she failed like 5 rheumatoid arthritis drugs. She already had pretty severe deformations of her hands. And I'm thinking, I don't really know if this is a time in your life that you should be focused on becoming a partner because she was not sleeping. It was crazy, but it was something that she had held on to. And I thought to myself, if you don't decide actually to take some time off and do something else for a while, this disease is going to win. Like I always say that your immune system doesn't care if you have a deadline. So,
I love it. I love it. There's so much that we could talk about and go into. We might have to have a part 2 another time because I wanna get to your, your top solutions, areas that you think that people can do for themselves to address this chronic stress, to help their guts. There's so much that people can do on their own. And I
Right.
really want to offer strategies, and they can get your book, and I hope that they do, because it is a beautiful roadmap to how to be well, and you offer all the supplements and things that people can take. But I just wonder if you can talk about some of the top things that you have seen work time and again.
Hmm. You know, I will tell you, I mean, nutrition is huge, 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 right? And I've had some patients who have really, really, really improved their symptoms due to nutrition. And I do think that all of us are very, I say the word myopic about our own dietary intake. So I had a wonderful nutritionist who worked with me for years, and we just would laugh because they would come in and they'd be like, "Oh, we'll have a healthy diet." I'm like, "Okay, what is that? What is your definition of a healthy diet?" And very, very, very adamant they had a healthy diet. And I'm like, there is no definition for a healthy diet, because what you think is a healthy diet may not be the healthy diet for you. And there's just so much garbage information out there. People are all sorts of different trendy diets and things. And so really sitting down, and we would do things like micronutrient testing to really just show people, listen, you're on a healthy diet, as you say, but you're deficient in zinc, you're deficient in vitamin D, you're deficient in vitamin A, because again, we have genetics at play there, right? So vitamin D is very much personally, I've had my genetic testing done. I have 3 different genetic SNPs, or, these changes, polymorphisms within the pathways that utilize and create vitamin D. So I have to take vitamin D year round. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. I could be out in the Caribbean. I have to take it. So there's all sorts of things like that, right? So you're going to have absorption issues. And so I think that looking at what are you actually eating? So we would do these, 5-day, 7-day diaries. And sometimes we would just laugh because we would say, oh, this person says they're on a healthy diet, and then they're drinking like a double frappuccino, but they sort of forgot about that. Um, it's just hilarious. It was just like, okay, can we really pull this apart? Um, and then there's also, food sensitivities, which may not be a problem for everyone, but I find with people who have autoimmune disease play a huge factor. Um, and so it may not be the first thing that we order, but we are always going to look for occult, gluten sensitivity, dairy sensitivity. We usually do a full panel. And we know that a lot of those sensitivities come up because of gut issues. And so they're not born with them. They're not anaphylactic, except for, obviously celiac disease is different. But a lot of times we would see that people were eating a lot of these foods on a daily basis, but they did have antibodies towards them. So we would guide them, obviously, through an elimination for, 3 months, 6 months or more. Um, and it was really, really, really impactful. So improving your nutrition, getting those micronutrients fixed, avoiding things that are causing inflammation, like that is so important. And that takes time.
Yeah.
And also bringing in more nutrient dense foods. And so that type of thing I think, can be super, super, super helpful. Um, But a lot of times I would say that people wanted to really focus on these very tangible things, right? So focusing on diet was not always hard for people because it was like something they could have control over. The things that I found a lot of resistance for, I would say the biggest thing was sort of stress lifestyle.
Yeah.
Trying to get people to let go of their phones or their computers, or turning off their TV before bed, getting their TV out of their bedroom. I mean, it was like it was like pulling it out of their hands. And it didn't matter how many times. It was just like, "Oh, well, I'm doing everything else, so I'm just not gonna do this." And I'm like, "Yeah, but maybe that's one of your biggest problems." Um, Addressing stress, and on a deeper level, not just like trying to do headspace on your phone, once a week, but really taking a deep dive into your mental health, what's going on, what's underneath it, and literally making it your job to focus on that. And I think some of the deepest healing comes from that, quite honestly, and it's hard work. People don't want to do it because it's hard work and it's uncomfortable.
Right.
But I find that my patients who addressed that, whether it was current issues, previous traumas, just inability to say no and have strong boundaries, if they address those things, it was like transformative. So,
I love that. I love that. Addressing stress, I find the same thing when we see people that have, whether it's childhood trauma, just ongoing chronic stress, and usually a combination of all of the above. And when you have symptoms, it's stressful, and that perpetuates a cycle because now you've got symptom anxiety on top of this. I mean,
mhm,
there's an aspect of nervous system healing that is so important because the immune system is listening to the nervous system,
mhm,
right? So
yes.
I'm curious in terms of programs or, I just thought of this at the moment, but any particular types of stress reduction techniques.
Mhm,
I like to talk about reduction because management just makes it sound like you're, caging a tiger, but sometimes
yeah,
I want people to be able to let it go. Are there
yes.
particular modalities, anything from EMDR to
Mhm.
neurofeedback that you have
I mean,
seen
I think
work?
it really depends on the person, right? And I do think it's very specific. So I always tell people, someone gave me this metaphor once. It was sort of like, because I would always tell people you should try some meditation. And they were like, oh, I tried it once before and it didn't work. So someone told me this metaphor that was like, okay, so say you need a new pair of shoes and you go to the department store, or whatever, DSW, wherever you buy your shoes, right? And you walk in there and you try on a pair of shoes and they don't fit and they're uncomfortable. And so you walk, you know, you don't walk out of the store and say, you know what, I hate shoes. I'm never going to buy shoes because those shoes didn't work for me. You're going to look for another pair of shoes that fits, right? Because you're trying to fix a problem. And so, and another thing too is that we live in such a mindless society, like, especially if you're younger. I mean, I had the benefit of growing up without cell phones, which I'm so deeply, like, grateful for. Um, and, so there's a lot of young people who, they grew up with the stressors of social media and smartphones and, just all of these things. And I think that you have to become more mindful about yourself, about everything. So I think breath work is really great because unlike meditation, you get to do something. You get to focus on something. So you can focus on your breath. So that's really good. I do think a lot of people do well with tapping, which is, sort of similar, but it's more like the acupressure with mantra. So again, it's sort of using a physical touch that can be, so grounds you, but also with, um, you know, mindfulness or speaking mantras that we know that, you can change, how you're talking to yourself in your head by doing this over time. And that's been shown to be really helpful. Um, so there's different modalities, but I always tell people, first of all, do not give up on something unless you've tried it for at least 30 days. At least 30 days. Um, so I think that's big. I think if you have deeper trauma, like talk to a therapist. They might recommend EMDR. Um, Even things like for me, um, I looked to what are the things that can, how am I distracting myself and are those things healthy and are they stressing me out more, right? Like, so why don't I do things that calm my nervous system down? So for example, doodling or doing art. For me, that's very it makes me mindful about what I'm doing and I'm not thinking about other stuff. I'm just thinking about what I'm drawing on the page. You don't have to be an artist. You can literally like finger paint if you want. That's why the adult coloring books came out, right? So there's that. There's so many different things, quite honestly. And I just feel like we give up on ourselves so easily. Um and this idea that we have to constantly be on and to hustle, like humans were never made for that. We were made to like rest. We were made to have community. We were made to socialize and like true socialization. Um, and I think that many of us are just it's like we don't even know where to start. So start with one thing.
Well, you just shared some beautiful examples of things, places where people can start. And you're absolutely right that it's up to the individual. Somebody who loves to doodle may not be somebody that likes to meditate, and somebody who loves to meditate may not, resonate with seeing a therapist. There's so many pathways in. The point is to do something that resonates with you, because
Yeah.
we see this all of the time. It's a practice because you don't just do it once. It's
Right.
ongoing. We have to support ourselves probably for the rest of our lives. I mean, there's so
Mhm.
many things in our modern lives that are hectic and frenetic. And like you said, we weren't built for, being on social media and cell
No.
phones and all of the things coming at us, bombarding us all the time. We have to have these digital detoxes. No one will do this for you. This
Mhm.
is something that we have to do for ourselves. So to be really mindful and honest with ourselves, what
Mhm.
is causing me stress? And what relaxes me, what calms me down, and do more of that.
Mhm.
That's what I would
Yeah.
just add to what you said. And I wonder, as we get close to the end of this, and I said I'll have to have you back because there's so many directions we could go in. What have I missed here that you would love to share? Messages that you might like to communicate? Um, Open it up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that um I'm just going to go back to that idea of, you know, be patient with yourself. I think that we're always, trying, I'm going to say always, but many people try to heal themselves through, I'm not going to say it's a hateful way, but like a, a unkind way. You know what I mean? And I think it's because we get a lot of messaging around, doing things that are hard, right? Like, I think of like that 75 hard, like exercise program, like you beat yourself to get into shape, like it's not out of love, right? It's out of this, like, I'm going to make my body do this. And I know that this is a common thing that I would hear from people, my patients with autoimmune disease. They would say their body turned on them, so it's almost like I'm going to fight back. I'm going to fight my body. I'm going to make my immune system do the thing that I want it to do. And I'm like, that is not what you want to do. Like, for those people, I say, go listen to Kristen Neff, who is a amazing researcher who talks about self-compassion. And more than anything, we all need more self-compassion. We are so hard on ourselves, especially women. Definitely. So hard on ourselves. We should be able to do X, Y, or Z and all of the above. In fact, I was just watching Martha Stewart's documentary the other day, and I thought, holy God, that woman is like, she's amazing, but wow, like, she was tough. But I remember growing up thinking like I had to be Martha Stewart, everything had to be perfect in my house, and I had to, look a certain way, and everything had to be pressed, and the flowers had to be perfect. And and then you get into the workforce and you have to do this, you have to climb the ladder, and then you got to have the perfect kids. And I mean, it's exhausting. And that's the messaging. And then it comes to your body and you're like, "Oh, why is this doing this?" And it's like, well, it's not necessarily your fault, but, can you see that maybe how you're picking up these messages about how your body and you should be doing this, you should be this person, instead of saying like, "Okay, maybe I could take a step back and realize that I need to actually take better care of my soul, my spirit, my body, instead of being so hard on myself. Let's do something kind." And then make that like your mantra, because I don't really think you can heal yourself if you don't like love yourself, if you're not kind to yourself. And that is something that a lot of people they have a hard time with it. Um, so that's why I say it takes a long time, you know.
Heather, that's such a beautiful message to end with. Be kind to yourself. I love it. I love it. One of the kind things that somebody can do for themselves is to go ahead and get Heather's book, The Immunotype Breakthrough. I'm just a fan because I've never seen anybody break down the immune system into these 4 different types, and it's so hopeful because there's so many resources for what you can actually do to turn the ship around. You're not a
Yeah,
victim of your
it really
circumstance and
is. You're
environment.
not a victim. I always take a deep breath, pick one thing, start doing it, move forward, have no expectations. I think that's like a Buddhist, thought that's like, don't don't have these expectations of like the final destination. Just move through it, like, day by day. We get very caught up in the goals and the expectations for ourselves. The body's going to do its own thing, and we just have to give it care and love and some birth, some rest, and it's amazing what it's able to do. It's amazing how regenerative, we actually are. So,
On that note, Heather, it has been such a pleasure talking with you. I'm so grateful for you, for our friendship early on from IFM. I look forward to many more conversations in the future. So thank you so much for this.
thank you, Palmer. It's great seeing you.
Great seeing you too.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends and family, and if you feel inspired, please leave a quick review so other people can find it too. Now, if you want to beat autoimmune and thrive, make sure you sign up for my free video training at freeautoimmunetraining.com. That's freeautoimmunetraining.com, and watch the first video right away. Take good care. Bye for now.